Inside a windowless dyno cell in Dearborn, Michigan, an engine is screaming past 9,000 RPM, and the sound coming out of it is deliberately, defiantly old-fashioned. While almost every rival manufacturer preparing for the 2027 24 Hours of Le Mans is building small turbocharged engines wrapped around electric motors, Ford has done something that looks, on paper, like a step backward. It has built a naturally aspirated 5.4-liter V8 based on the same Coyote architecture that powers a Mustang you can buy at a dealership, and it is betting that this engine can beat cars with more advanced, more efficient, more fashionable powertrains. To understand why that bet is either brilliant or reckless, you have to understand what Ford is actually walking back into, because this is not a company entering endurance racing for the first time. This is a company trying to finish a story it started and won 6 decades ago, then walked away from at the peak of its power. Between 1966 and 1969, Ford's GT40 won Le Mans 4 years in a row, a program built specifically to humiliate Ferrari after Enzo Ferrari backed out of a sale to Henry Ford II, a rivalry so bitter and so cinematic it became a Hollywood movie 50 years later. Ford's overall win in 1966 remains, to this day, the only outright Le Mans victory by an American manufacturer. And it came with its own controversy worth remembering, because Ford orchestrated a staged photo finish that year, lining up 3 GT40s to cross the line together in a show of total dominance, only for officials to later award the win to the car that had actually started slightly further back on the grid. A footnote that still gets argued about by historians decades later. That kind of theater, engineering built as much for spectacle as for lap time, is baked into this brand's motorsport identity, and it helps explain why Ford is once again choosing the loudest, most emotionally charged version of a competitive engine rather than the quietest, most efficient one. For nearly 60 years after that 1969 fourth straight win, nobody from Dearborn came back to try to win the whole race again. That silence ends in June 2027, at the 95th running of the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and Ford is not coming back quietly. CEO Jim Farley has said plainly that the goal is to win outright, not to make up the numbers on the grid. And everything about how this program has been structured backs that statement up. Most manufacturers entering the current hypercar era lean on an existing partner team with decades of prototype experience, the way Ferrari leans on AF Corse or the way Porsche leans on Penske. Ford chose a different, harder path. It is building its own in-house factory operation from scratch, only the third manufacturer in the field to do that, alongside Toyota and Peugeot, both of whom compete under a more bespoke and far more expensive rulebook. Ford is doing it inside the cheaper LMDh category, which makes the decision to go fully factory even more unusual and considerably riskier, because there is no experienced outside team to catch the mistakes a rookie program is almost guaranteed to make. The chassis underneath that ambition comes from Oreca, a French constructor. Ford selected specifically because Oreca already understands the demands of the Circuit de la Sarthe better than almost anyone. But that choice comes with a built-in branding problem, worth understanding, because current LMDh regulations only allow 4 homologated chassis manufacturers for the entire grid, which means every LMDh car on the grid is, underneath its bodywork, related to at least one competitor. Oreca alone already supplies Acura, Alpine, and Genesis, and all 3 of those cars share a strikingly similar silhouette, including a raised front wing section that first appeared on Acura's earlier prototype. Ford's own program manager, Dan Sayers, has openly acknowledged the risk, saying the goal was for the car to represent Ford's own aerodynamic identity rather than simply wearing Oreca's default shape, which is why Ford's design studio was given direct input into the car's surfacing rather than leaving it purely to the chassis partner. That tension between shared engineering and brand identity sits at the center of everything else Ford is doing with this program, and nowhere is it clearer than in the engine bay. Every LMDh car on the grid, by regulation, uses the same spec-hybrid system, a standardized motor generator unit, battery, and control electronics built by a single approved supplier, which means no manufacturer is allowed to out-engineer another on the hybrid side of the equation at all. That single rule quietly reshapes the entire competitive philosophy of this class. Because if the hybrid unit is identical for everyone, the only places left to find an advantage are the internal combustion engine, the chassis tuning, the aerodynamics within a tightly boxed set of regulations, and driver execution. Ferrari, Porsche, Cadillac, and most of the field responded to that reality by building small displacement turbocharged engines, chasing efficiency and a narrow, high-pressure power band. Ford went the opposite direction on purpose. Its 5.4-liter Coyote-derived V8 is naturally aspirated, built entirely in-house for the first time in the company's racing history, developed with support from Red Bull Ford Powertrains, the same organization building Ford's Formula One engines, and it shares core architecture with the production-based Mustang, Dark Horse R, GT4, and GT3 race cars already competing around the world. That shared architecture is not a coincidence or a cost-saving shortcut. It is the entire marketing thesis of the program, because Ford wants a paying customer's Mustang and a Le Mans prototype to sound like they came from the same family. And a naturally aspirated engine, revving cleanly past 9,000 RPM, delivers an emotional signature that a muffled turbocharged hybrid simply cannot replicate, regardless of which car crosses the line first. Whether that emotional bet translates into lap time is a genuinely open engineering question, because naturally aspirated engines typically sacrifice outright efficiency and low-end torque compared to turbocharged rivals. And in a fuel flow regulated endurance race, efficiency under balance of performance rules matters just as much as peak horsepower. It helps to understand what balance of performance actually does in this category, because it is the single biggest reason a naturally aspirated engine can still be competitive against turbocharged rivals at all. Series officials continuously adjust fuel flow limits, minimum weight, and hybrid deployment for every car on the grid based on real-world performance data, specifically to prevent any one engine configuration from running away with the championship. In theory, that means Ford's V8 does not need to match a turbocharged rival's raw efficiency on paper. It only needs to be close enough that regulators can balance the rest through weight and fuel allowances, which turns this into as much a regulatory chess match as a pure engineering contest. Cost caps layered on top of balance of performance are exactly why LMDh exists as a category in the first place, capping how much manufacturers can spend on chassis and powertrain development, specifically so that smaller programs like Ford's rookie effort are not simply outspent into irrelevance by manufacturers with decades more prototype experience and far larger racing budgets. The people writing Ford's real answer to that question are not marketing executives. They are the engineers who spent months running that engine through a complete virtual lap of the Circuit de la Sarthe on a Dearborn dyno rig before it ever touched a real racetrack, simulating every braking zone, every gear change, and every acceleration point the car will face during 24 consecutive hours of racing. That validation work led directly to the engine's first real ignition at Oreca's facility in France in July 2026, a moment Ford's own team described internally as more than symbolic, calling it a critical validation step where months of dyno promises finally became a physical, running powertrain bolted into an actual chassis. From there, the plan accelerates quickly. On-track testing across multiple European circuits began in August 2026, followed by a testing campaign in the United States, all building toward a full 30-hour simulated endurance run early in 2027, a deliberate rehearsal for the exact kind of mechanical attrition that has ended more Le Mans campaigns than any rival on track ever has. The competitive debut is expected at the WEC season opener in Qatar in February 2027, months before the team arrives at Le Mans itself, carrying real race data instead of simulation numbers. Behind the wheel, Ford has assembled a 6-driver roster that reads like a deliberate hedge against the very risk of being a first-year program, pairing genuine prototype pedigree with hands who already understand what it costs to keep a car alive for a full day and night of racing. Mike Rockenfeller won Le Mans outright in 2010 and brings the kind of experience that only comes from having already done the hardest thing this program is chasing: Matt Campbell arrives with a resume built on international sports car racing, including a class win at Le Mans in 2018, and Ford has specifically flagged him as central to vehicle development rather than pure race duty, which tells you where the program's early priorities actually sit. Tom Blomqvist brings 2 Rolex 24 overall victories and Le Mans prototype experience of his own. Nick Yellowly is regarded as a 24-hour specialist. Sebastian Priaulx is already inside the Ford family from its GT programs, and Logan Sargent, a former Formula One driver, gives the effort a recognizable name while he builds sports car experience the hard way, racing a GT-class Mustang before ever touching the hypercar. None of that experience guarantees anything, because the field Ford is walking into may be the deepest hypercar grid in the history of the category. 19 cars are expected on the 2027 grid, representing Ferrari, Cadillac, Alpine, Genesis, McLaren, Toyota, Peugeot, Aston Martin, Porsche, and now Ford. And the benchmark is not some faded former champion, it is Ferrari's 499p, winner of Le Mans in each of the last 3 consecutive years, running through its partnership with AF Corse, a program Ford's own engineers openly describe as the standard the entire field is still chasing. Toyota, the class's most experienced manufacturer by a wide margin, has already beaten Ferrari to a race win this season, and Porsche's factory partnership with Penske remains the kind of operational benchmark that rookie programs measure themselves against, rather than expect to immediately surpass. Layered on top of the on-track competition is a geopolitical complication nobody on the entry list controls. An ongoing regional conflict in the Middle East that has already forced the relocation of part of next season's Asian Le Mans calendar into Europe. A reminder that even a program this carefully engineered still has to operate inside a world that refuses to stay predictable. There is also a commercial calculation running underneath all of this racing theater that rarely gets discussed openly, because a Le Mans class win, let alone an outright victory, functions as a halo effect for Ford's entire performance car lineup. The same way the original GT40 program helped sell Mustangs and GTs for decades afterward. Every technical detail Ford's marketing team has chosen to highlight, from the shared Coyote architecture to the in-house engine build, is designed to let a customer standing in a dealership feel like their production Mustang shares real DNA with a car built to survive 24 hours at full throttle. And that emotional connection is worth more to Ford's bottom line than most single race results ever will be. What makes Ford's approach genuinely worth watching is not simply that an American manufacturer is trying to win Le Mans again, it is the specific contrarian engineering philosophy underneath the attempt. An in-house naturally aspirated V8 built by a rookie factory team wedged into a shared chassis, competing against a grid of turbocharged specialists with far more recent prototype pedigree. If it works, it becomes a genuine case study in how a legacy internal combustion identity can still be a competitive advantage inside a hybrid-regulated era, rather than a liability to be hidden. If it fails, it becomes a lesson in how much emotional engineering costs when the stopwatch stops caring how good something sounds. Either way, the answer arrives on a very specific date, in June 2027, at the same French circuit where Ford last proved it could beat the best cars in the world nearly 60 years ago. And this time, there is no guarantee the ending gets written the same way twice.